President Trump has threatened to impose 100% import tariffs on any country, including the UK, which taxes US tech companies. Writing on social media, the president said his tariff would supersede any deal made between the US and the country of focus, whether implemented, signed or not. The UK's 2% levy on the revenues of companies including Amazon, Apple and eBay raised almost £1 billion for the Treasury last year and is overwhelmingly supported by the British public. So why is President Trump so angry about it? Well, Greg Swenson is chair of Republicans Overseas.
I mean, I think he's probably angry about any tax, and I think that he just feels like, okay, we're looking after. I mean, this ties into the whole NATO discussion. I mean, I think he feels like the American taxpayer has been funding free healthcare in the UK and 6 weeks holiday in France for 80 years, and it's just frustrating to him. And so I think he comes back with these perhaps 100% tariffs. That's a little bit much. I mean,
It's
I
a bit
think the
steep, isn't
president.
it?
Yeah, I mean, I think he likes hyperbole. He likes to, why go out with a 20% tariff when you can say 100? So there's a certain element of bravado there, but I do think the president, is upset about this, and so is the State Department, and I know Sarah Rogers has been running around the UK for the last 6 or 9 months talking about, this potential digital services tax, and it's something that, of course, her job and their job is to look out for American interests or American companies. But I think it also goes to some of the more cultural differences. And I think it's not only that he doesn't want American companies to pay a tax that he doesn't think is fair, but it's also a certain degree of, you know, what's going on with Western Europe. The economies of the UK and Western Europe 20 years ago were basically equivalent to the US economy. And now, the GDP per capita in the US is double GDP per capita in Europe combined, and or in the Eurozone, let's
Yeah.
call it. So, I think it's mostly the president defending American interests, but there's a certain element
Okay.
of, hey, you guys are managing your own decline. Why don't you take a page out of our playbook?
Yeah, and I see the validity to that argument. I suppose on the flip side of that, if the UK was to maintain its existing 2% digital services tax, in response, Trump is suggesting that every bottle of Scotch whiskey, every British car, every pharmaceutical product entering the US would be
Yeah,
tariffed at 100%. And we all know, Greg, that when it comes to tariffs, they're not paid by governments, they're paid by importers and they're passed on to consumers. So
yeah.
Trump's
There's this.
methodology here is slightly odd, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that it's not apples and apples,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I think you have a point. It's like that kind of tariff is a bit extreme, and there's different studies that are out. The San Francisco Fed has been looking at tariffs for 100 years, and there's no inflation from them. Yes, some of it gets passed on to consumers, but a lot of it is passed on to the importers as well. So it's debatable, of
Mhm.
course. I mean, it's not an exact science, but I do think that the president and same with the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent. They're not afraid to use economic levers as statecraft, and they're sort of punching back in a way. I mean, that's probably a kind of a crude explanation of it, but
Well, but I hear that, and I suppose that the other part of that then is to consider that just last month the US and the EU actually finalised their trade
yeah,
agreement,
yeah,
and tariffs were capped at 15%. But in this latest sort of outburst from Trump, he suggests that this new 100% tariff would supersede trade deals, whether implemented, signed, or not. And so you've
yeah.
got to look at this and go, hang on a second, you had a deal, you had a treaty. You can't
I
just tear
know,
it up on
I know.
social media of an angry Friday evening.
Yeah, well, I think that you hit a few good points there. It might have very well been an angry Friday evening, and look, he's going to use the the consumer of the United States is it's the most valuable consumer market in the world by
Mm.
far. It's like 33% of world consumption or something crazy like that. Don't quote me. But it's really amazing how. no one has ever done this in the past. And not only, I think the view is you have to pay an entry fee to have access to that market. And the imports to the American consumer are not that important. Okay, yeah, we love the French wine and we like other things that come from Europe, but it's a fraction. It's 15% tops of the American consumption. Most of the consumption is generated in the U.S. And so I think that there's some view that, again, this is a bit of statecraft and it's a bit of negotiating. Is okay, we're not going to give away that market for nothing. And so, especially if someone's threatening to impose taxes on our big tech companies. And the other thing to keep in mind is, that again, back to the argument of what's good for Europe and what's good for the UK. It's surely not more taxes, because tax and regulation are the things that are killing the economies of Western Europe. And if you look, I mean, it's a silly example, but there's 14 companies in Western Europe that are worth more than 10 billion. And granted, a lot of those are tech companies in the US in comparison, but there's 250 of those in the US. It's 400 billion versus 30 trillion. It's like, this is an example of why Europe doesn't have a great entrepreneurial culture of innovation and capital formation. I mean, you have similar populations and similar cultures, and yet the US is just crushing in terms of capital formation and economic growth and all those metrics that I could bore you to death with. But I think it troubles the president. I mean, he's very fond of the UK. He's got real connections, more than any president probably since Reagan and Thatcher had that great relationship. And I think it troubles him to see the natural impulse to tax and regulate instead of liberating the private economy, because that's what works.
We've seen it before, haven't we? Trump starts at 100%. Where will he get to? But there is a serious question in there, and we put that to Greg, about if he's saying that any deal that's done can be completely thrown out. Why has he got such a bee in his bonnet about the digital services tax? It's not that much money for these massive companies, but it's clearly helpful for countries like the UK. Anyway, President Trump's latest social media ranting there for you.
Can you imagine if we had to keep up with all of them all of the time?
It's exhausting.
There is just so many of them, and I don't know if there's going to be history books in the future all dedicated to just his tweets.
On that, I'm so intrigued as to what happens at the midterms later this year in November. What happens and what the impact is on Trump's ability to do stuff. I think there's a couple of schools of thought on that. One is, if he kind of loses his grip on power in the various branches of government, does that actually just make him angrier? Does he become more of a social media warrior because he's sort of paralysed by the system, as it were? On the other hand, does that actually inspire him to just sort of go on more executive order, sort of rampaging for the couple of years that he's got left?
So basically, either way, it's a bit of a tantrum.
Well, it could be. It could be. I mean, there's probably a kinder reading of it than that.
Sure.
But that's the one I've just conveyed.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of thinking, if it doesn't go well for him in the midterms, who does he start a war with next?
Yeah.
It's also the question. It's funny, isn't it? Because they have said historically for so many years that women can't hold these positions of power because we're too hysterical. And I find Donald Trump is really overturning that for all the women everywhere.